Oh my goodness, that's a great question because you would probably get just a handful of people that would be on that list.
There is a particular kind of man in country music who earns his reputation not through controversy, but through quiet, unwavering consistency. Vince Gill is that man. For nearly 5 decades, he has stood at the center of Nashville's creative world, winning more Grammy Awards than almost any other country artist in history, earning the respect of peers, producers, and fans alike. He is soft-spoken, genuinely warm, and famously self-deprecating. When people in the industry describe Vince Gill, the word they reach for most often is simply this: nice. But here is the thing about men who are always described as nice. Sometimes, behind the gentleness, there is a steel core. Sometimes, the politest person in the room has the sharpest opinions. And sometimes, the man who never raises his voice has made peace with exactly who he cannot stand. At 68 years old, Vince Gill has lived long enough, worked hard enough, and cared deeply enough about his craft that he has, over the years, drawn some very clear lines. Not in public. Not in interviews. Not on social media, where country feuds play out these days like bad reality television. Vince draws his lines quietly, privately, the way he does most things. But those lines are real, and the people closest to the Nashville music world know exactly where they fall. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on 7 artists that Vince Gill has had serious problems with over the course of his career. These are not fabricated feuds or tabloid inventions. These are tensions rooted in genuine artistic disagreement, clashing values, and the kind of behind-the-scenes friction that never makes the evening news but shapes careers in very real ways. Some of these names will surprise you. One of them might genuinely shock you. But all of them tell a deeper story about who Vince Gill really is, and what he believes music is supposed to mean. Let us begin. To understand why Vince Gill and Garth Brooks never quite clicked, you have to understand what country music looked like in the early 1990s. Both men were rising at roughly the same time. Both had genuine talent. Both were drawing massive audiences. But the way they went about it could not have been more different. Garth Brooks was a phenomenon in the truest sense of the word. He did not just sell records, he redefined what a country music concert could look like. Stadium shows, pyrotechnics, elaborate stage rigs, emotional breakdowns in front of 80,000 people. Garth borrowed from rock and roll's playbook and applied it to country, and the result was the best-selling solo music career in American history. By any commercial measure, Garth Brooks was the biggest thing country music had ever seen. Vince Gill watched all of this from a very different vantage point. His concerts were intimate. His music was precise, technically brilliant, emotionally honest. He was the guitarist's guitarist, the singer that other singers came to hear. His world was built on restraint, on finding the exact right note rather than filling an arena with sound and spectacle. People close to both artists during that era say the tension between them was never explosive, but it was consistent. Vince did not hide his discomfort with what he saw as the theatricalization of country music. He believed the music should be the event, not the production surrounding it. He reportedly turned down at least one invitation to collaborate with Brooks during that period, and those close to the situation say it was not a scheduling conflict. It was a values conflict. Over the years, Vince gave enough interviews and made enough carefully worded public statements that people in the industry learned to read between the lines. When he spoke about country music losing its sense of intimacy, people understood what he meant. When he joked at industry events that country music was not Broadway with boots, everyone in the room caught the reference. Garth never responded publicly. But the distance between the two men, both literally and professionally, was something that anyone paying attention could see. They shared stages at awards shows, attended the same industry functions, and somehow, across 3 decades, never once made music together. In an industry that runs on collaboration, that kind of sustained separation is not an accident. This one is more complicated, and it gets to something fundamental about how Vince Gill thinks about the craft of songwriting. Chris Christopherson is, by any measure, one of the most important figures in the history of American music. He wrote Me and Bobby McGee. He wrote Sunday Morning Coming Down. He wrote Help Me Make It Through the Night. These are not just good songs, they are permanent fixtures of the American songbook. His influence on outlaw country, on the poets and rebels who came after him, is immeasurable. And yet, Vince Gill has always had a complicated relationship with what Christopherson represented, both musically and philosophically. Vince is, at his core, a perfectionist. He practices guitar until his fingers ache. He revises lyrics until every word earns its place. He approaches music the way a craftsman approaches furniture. Every joint should be tight, every surface should be smooth, and the finished product should be built to last. This is not just an aesthetic preference for Vince. It is an ethical one. He believes that caring deeply about the craft is an act of respect, both for the audience and for the tradition. Kristofferson's approach, by contrast, has always prized rawness over refinement. His songs sometimes feel like they were caught rather than constructed, as if he grabbed an emotion before it could escape and pinned it to a page. That spontaneity is part of their power. But to Vince, it also represented something like carelessness, a willingness to leave rough edges that he personally could never accept. The tension was not personal animosity. It was philosophical disagreement. Vince admired Kristofferson's impact on the genre. He acknowledged, at least in carefully measured public statements, that the outlaw movement pushed country music in important directions. But he also made clear, in his way, that he thought some of those rebels had sacrificed discipline on the altar of attitude. The implication was obvious to anyone who knew the landscape. If the Kristofferson tension was philosophical, the Billy Ray Cyrus situation was something more immediate and visceral. When Achy Breaky Heart exploded in 1992, it did not just become a hit song. It became a cultural event. Line dancing swept across the country. Billy Ray's face was on every magazine cover. Country radio could not play the track enough. And somewhere in Nashville, Vince Gill was watching all of this with a feeling he probably struggled to put into polite words. Vince had spent years building a reputation on substance. His ballads were deeply felt, his musicianship was extraordinary, his songwriting was the kind that made other songwriters take notes. He had earned his place in country music through sustained, serious artistic effort. And now the biggest country song in the country was a line dance novelty built around a hook that did not ask anything of its audience at all. The frustration was not really about Billy Ray Cyrus as a person. By most accounts, Cyrus was friendly enough on the circuit. The frustration was about what his success represented, proof that country music's audience could be won through catchiness alone, without depth, without nuance, without any of the things Vince had dedicated his life to perfecting. It felt, to Vince, like a door had been opened, and he did not like what was walking through it. Those who worked behind the scenes during that era describe a Vince Gill who was professionally courteous around Cyrus but genuinely cold in his private assessments. He thought the image was manufactured, the music was shallow, and the whole phenomenon was doing the genre a quiet but serious kind of harm. What made it worse was that he was right, at least partially. The wave that Billy Ray rode did inspire a generation of acts built more on image than on artistry. Vince saw it coming, and the fact that he could not stop it made it sting even more. No artist on this list forces a more nuanced conversation than Shania Twain, because no artist on this list accomplished more or changed more lives through their music. Shania was genuinely transformative. She brought country music to audiences around the world who had never given the genre a second thought. She proved that women could headline stadiums, dominate charts, and define eras. Her success was historic by any measure. And Vince Gill, for all his genuine respect for what she accomplished, could not fully get on board with how she did it. The core of Vince's discomfort with Shania was not about her talent, which was real, or her ambition, which was admirable. It was about the sound. Shania's music was deliberately constructed to live at the crossroads of country and pop. The production was sleek, the hooks were enormous, and the result was something that could play on country radio and pop radio simultaneously. That was the strategy, and it worked brilliantly. But for Vince, that strategy came with a cost. The roughness, the vulnerability, the sense of something being genuinely felt rather than carefully crafted for maximum market appeal, all of that got smoothed away in pursuit of the crossover hit. The music was polished to a shine that, in his view, made it less true rather than more beautiful. The silence between them across public life was telling. In an industry where artists praise each other constantly, where award show speeches are full of genuine and manufactured admiration alike, Vince's consistent failure to celebrate Shania's achievements in any meaningful public way said everything. He was not hostile. He was simply absent from her story in ways that anyone paying attention could not help but notice. The complicated irony is that Shania's success opened doors for many of the female artists Vince has genuinely championed over the years. The path that led to Carrie Underwood also ran through Come On Over. Country music's expanded audience, which gave serious artists a larger world to work in, was partly built by the pop crossover machine that Vince so distrusted. He has never quite reckoned with that contradiction publicly. But it is there. By the time Jason Aldean arrived as a dominant force in country music, Vince Gill had been watching the same pattern repeat itself for nearly 2 decades. A new artist arrives, built more on attitude and energy than on songwriting depth. The audience responds. The charts light up. Radio follows. and the kind of country music Vince has always believed in gets pushed a little further toward the margins. With Aldean, it was what critics would eventually label bro country: loud guitars, party themes, trucks and tailgates, a lifestyle aesthetic that was more about image than story. Aldean was not without talent. He knew how to hold a crowd, knew how to deliver a hook, knew how to make people feel like they were having a good time. But the emotional depth that Vince considers essential to genuine country music was largely absent from the formula. Vince made his feelings known in the way he always does, through careful absence. People in the Nashville community took note of which events he chose to attend and which he quietly declined. When an industry gathering skewed heavily toward the bro country world, Vince found reasons to be elsewhere. This was not passive aggression. It was, in his view, a principled stand. He did not want to lend his presence and his reputation to something he fundamentally disagreed with. The deeper tension here is generational. Aldean's audience is largely made up of fans who came to country music through exactly the kind of energy-driven, lifestyle-focused music that Vince distrusts. These fans are not wrong to love what they love. But their tastes represent a shift in what country music is asked to do, and for Vince, that shift has real consequences for the tradition he has spent his life protecting. This one is admittedly unusual, because Kanye West is not a country artist and has never claimed to be. But the reason his name enters this conversation is important, and it says something revealing about how broadly Vince Gill thinks about music and what it is supposed to do. Vince has, over the years, made statements that go beyond the borders of country music. He has spoken, in interviews and public settings, about the broader cultural shift in which music became less about connection and more about self-promotion. He has expressed genuine concern about a world where artists build personal brands as aggressively as they build catalogs, where the music sometimes feels like the least important product being sold. Kanye West is the most extreme version of that phenomenon in modern music history. His talent is not in question. At his best, he is genuinely visionary. But the performance of his public life, the cultivation of a persona that is designed to generate reaction regardless of the music's quality, represents something that is almost the precise opposite of what Vince Gill has always stood for. Vince has spent his career trying to make himself smaller so his songs can feel bigger. Kanye has spent his career making himself enormous, sometimes at the expense of the music. Vince has never named Kanye directly. He is too careful and too courteous for that. But when he speaks about artists who have made fame the product rather than the byproduct, the description is unmistakable. It reflects a genuine and deeply felt concern about what music risks becoming when ego becomes the engine.